It seems like we haven't been together for quite a while because of we skipped a week. And just quickly, next week, we're back on Wednesdays for 5 weeks. Interesting weeks. 3 weeks before the election, the day after the election, and then the next week. I think we have some interesting times ahead of us. But I'm very excited this morning to introduce you to two quite amazing people, Bill Baird and his wife, Joni, who are on the screen and who will be talking with us about Bill's career as an activist and as a pioneer, really, in the area of birth control and abortion. Bill's career goes back 6 decades, from the early 60s until quite recently. I think some of you, perhaps many of you, will remember him, particularly those of you who were on the East Coast at that time. Just quickly, you can't summarize Bill's 6 decades in 3 minutes, or indeed an hour and a half. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time summarizing, but he will get into it as we talk about this. And I also want to introduce our special guest, Joan Schmidt-Green, who actually represented Bill in a number of his cases back in the day. Joni was a criminal lawyer in Boston and worked for people who you may have heard of, F. Lee Bailey and Joe Bolero, two very noted criminal attorneys in the Boston area, a longtime friend and counsel to Bill and Joni. Just some quick highlights to kind of bring this back in your mind. Bill was, I think, arrested 8 times in 5 different states. He served time in the Charles Street Jail. For those of you who lived in Boston, you may remember that jail was condemned. And it was during the condemnation time when Bill spent, I think it was 40 days there. One of his abortion clinics was firebombed with 60 people in it, and they all got out, fortunately. And Bill suffered an infinite number of personal attacks on both himself and his family. He won 3 cases in the Supreme Court, most notably the Eisenstadt case, which was really the forerunner to Roe. And in fact,
I got the thing, but I can't get him to.
I'm sorry. Somebody can't hear?
It's the Zoom people. People on Zoom should stay muted. Maynard, can you ask the folks on Zoom to please stay muted?
So the Zoom people should please stay muted. We have a whole retinue of tech people present, because if it was left to me, you wouldn't hear or see anything. So I do have consultants on all sides, which I desperately need. I appreciate your patience. So the people on Zoom should please stay muted. Sarah, we want to make clear, if people on Zoom have questions, they should put them in the chat. Is that correct? And depending upon the number of questions and the timing, we may either take them as we go, or we may hold them and then take them at some later time during a Q&A. And I think similarly here, at least at the beginning, I'd like to, let Bill answer some general questions that we will ask. And then as we proceed, if you have questions, you can raise your hands. I was mentioning the Eisenstadt case, which I think is critically important. That was the case in which people who were not married were now able to purchase contraception. I know that is an unbelievable thing for anybody to remember, even people here, but it was true that before 1972, if you were purchasing contraception, you were breaking the law. And the guy who was selling it to you was breaking the law. And so was everybody else in the chain. But with the Dobbs case having come down, we are looking at the possibility of a whole series of falling bowling pins here. Row at the top, and then a whole series of other cases and rights which could be overturned. And Bill was an icon in this area, in this field. And this case, which he brought along with two others, this case in particular has been on many lists of one of the most important cases in the Supreme Court in the 20th century. So we owe Bill mightily, not just for that case, but for all his work. So a welcome, please, for Bill and his wife, Joni. So, Bill, I understand that you grew up in a poor family in New York.
Well, yeah, first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting me to come. This is an important issue and it's in grave danger as it is today. Yeah, I grew up in the Great Depression, if people old enough to remember that. That was in 1932. And to say we were poor, it would be an understatement. A term that older people might know is called junking. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I used to go from garbage can to garbage can because we had no money. And I used to kick the garbage can to make sure there are no rats in it, put my hand in and take out newspapers. And then I'd take a pile of them, like 100 pounds. I'd get 75 cents from the junkyard and I would give that money to my mother. But that was our means of survival. So being poor was probably an understatement. But nevertheless, I had a vow to myself that if we ever got through this poverty, including the death of a baby brother, of course, we didn't have money. He was 1 year old. I never met him. He died before I was born. But then I had a 12-year-old sister who was very close and screaming one night. I thought she was in some sort of pain and found out she had a ruptured appendix and she died. And I wept so badly because I loved her. We were very close. And to lose a 12-year-old sister, and I were 9 years old, because we didn't have money, I thought it was an outrage. And I vowed if I could ever get out of that poverty, go to college as I did, and be one of 6 kids, that maybe we could contribute something back to say that poor people are not a scourge. They contribute and be doing something of value. So I'm delighted.
And then I understand, Bill, that you actually started medical school at one point and were unable to finish because of the lack of finances. And you wound up going to work as a representative for a pharmaceutical company.
My background is varied. When I graduated college, Brooklyn College, I served 2 years in the United States Army. At their request, I certainly didn't want to be in intelligence corps, but nevertheless, I went on and I went to medical school. I was elected, believe it or not, president of my class for 128 students, but wound up finding out that I could not handle the finances because my wife was pregnant, the fourth pregnancy, could not support 4 kids. And so I left, got hired by a drug company, and it was a very sad thing to see the public ignorant of birth control, particularly at Harlem Hospital. When I heard a scream of racing into the corridor, I saw this woman covered with blood with a coat hanger sticking out of her, and she died. And I was so outraged that somebody could die because they could not get medical care. And I did the obvious thing. I went to Planned Parenthood, who had all the money and all the power, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, "We don't give out birth control." And hear what I said. We don't give out birth control to unmarried people unless you can prove you're being married within 6 months. And I thought that was crazy. So I said, "The heck with you. I'll establish my own clinic," which I did. I established a clinic and I began helping people illegally, but to licensed doctors. And that began my fight. But the courage I got from seeing the women gave me the courage to continue fighting for now 70 years almost.
And then you started a company. You had something called the Plan Van.
Well, what happened was that I started, my brother was a very famous doctor, had a Haven clinic, a drug addict clinic, and he wanted me to come there and see some of his patients because some of them were kids 14, 15 who were prostitutes to support their drug addict, and they got pregnant. And as you know, certain drugs will go through the placenta barrier and infants are born addicted. So when I saw that, I went there and I tried to help. And then in that area, I found out when I went back, the superintendent of the building said he was going to be die in hell according to his minister and his Catholic leadership. And they said that I could not come back. So I decided to get a mobile van, a 25-foot van, fix it up like a living room, and I drove it from poor area to poor area. And I brought birth control and abortion help directly to the poor communities, which is more direct and a bigger help to poor people.
And as you mentioned, much of this activity at that time was illegal.
So there was a clearly against the law to show birth control or give information about abortion or any of these devices, which is crazy.
Right.
In New York State and most states, by the way.
And certainly in Massachusetts,
Yes.
the great Commonwealth to the south.
Right.
And then at one point, I think you were arrested in Wisconsin for displaying quote unquote obscene objects.
Well, when I got to the airport, the plane landed and I looked and I saw, maybe several hundred college students with signs, "Free Bill Baird." So what are they talking about? I'm here. And then when the plane stopped, all of a sudden half a dozen cops came in, handcuffed me, because I had spoken there before and I had showed a diaphragm and an IUD. So I quickly reached into my pocket and I took out a paper clip and I had the IUD in my pocket and I put it on my tie. So I knew if I was going to be arrested, I'd be photographed by the TV cameras, which I saw, and they photographed my being arrested, but they photographed the IUD. And the law said you could not exhibit any means of birth control. So I tricked them into breaking the same law I was being arrested for, thinking I could involve them in the defense of my case. But they all ran.
So your New York,
Yep.
his New York arrest was 1965, and that helped get the law changed by the New York State Legislature.
Right.
Then you were arrested in New Jersey before Wisconsin
and
in
it-
1966.
And that was crazy because a woman called me crying hysterically. And I said, I couldn't understand. I said, what's wrong? She says, will you help me? Will you help me? I'm going to jail. I said, what did you do? I had sex. I'm not married. And the law on fornication is a 1-year jail term. I said, well, that's nuts. Are they jailing the male? No, just me. So it was the old story in those days when I grew up. You know, women were whores and tramps, men were super studs and Don Juans and lady men, and I'm sitting back. So I called the state and I spoke to the director of the welfare department, and he said, yeah, that's our law. And I said, well, I'm going to come there in my mobile clinic and I'm going to teach these mothers birth control. And I'm going to fight your law. Well, you get ready to go to jail. I said, well, you get ready for a fight. And I drove there with the mobile clinic, and it wasn't 2 cops or 3 cops. There were 50 cops with shotguns, with pistols. I mean, if you saw the scene, all I had was a can of foam, a condom, and an IUD in my hand. They arrested me on the spot for showing obscene objects. I was convicted, sentenced to prison for 20 days, and the rest I don't know. I collapsed in prison, they told me, and they shipped me out to a hospital. They thought I had a heart attack. I still don't know what happened, but I was in a hospital for a while, but then released. And then I got a letter from Joe, what the heck was his name?
Ray Mungo.
Ray Mungo, the Boston University newspaper. He says, please, will you fight our law called Crimes Against Chastity? The law said if you print, publish, or exhibit any means of birth control or give any information about abortion, it's up to 5 years on each charge. I said, are you crazy? I said, to Ray, I can't do that. I got 4 little kids. I have no money. I have no lawyer. Oh, we took care of that. We have a promise from the ACLU. If you come and you challenge the law and get arrested, bring the law into the courtroom, they will defend you. I said, all right, based on that promise. So I went there on April the 6th, 1967. I get there, there's a dozen police cars. I was active in the peace movement. I thought it was for the peace movement. I go in there, there's over 2,500 kids. So when I got up and I spoke, and I said, wait a second, they're really out here to get me. There were over 20 cops. So I said, well, I better do this right. So I held up during the speech, I don't know how well you can see this.
Oh.
The law said you could not print or publish. Here, Joni, my bring it.
It'll be the vandal later.
It shows you Time magazine. Now, the date of it, April the 6th, 1967. Now, that was illegal. So I held it up and I said, it is illegal for anyone to print, publish, exhibit any means of birth control. This is breaking the law. And I put on top of the magazine St. Joseph's Baby Aspirin that looked like the pill, and I showed the real pill. So I said, are you going to arrest me for that? Cops did nothing. So then the next thing I did, I held up, Joni, if you could show the actual birth control board that I use in my lectures,
Which side do you want?
the abortion part.
Okay.
And these are devices that women showed me when they came to me. They would take a douching bag and fill it with Lysol, with bleach, with turpentine, and often would die. Or they would take a baster, fill with soap suds, and they didn't realize that the soap had fat, and the fat could absorb the fat from the soap, and they could die of fat embolism. So, or they would take a piece of coat hanger, wrap the end of it with adhesive tape, so it wouldn't be so sharp, gently push it into the uterine wall, and sometimes they would slip, perforate the uterine, they would hemorrhage to death. So I said, this was insane. If you show the other side, Joni, I would show the opposite side, which were means of birth control. People had no idea what a diaphragm was, or what they would do is they would borrow the mother's diaphragm. Now you can see there are different sizes. A kid may have a small diaphragm but not know it, but she would borrow her mother's diaphragm, which was large and it wouldn't fit properly, and she would get pregnant. Or they would turn around and use withdrawal where a guy says, hey, I'm experienced. I'll pull out on time, like the railroad station in Long Island, that old quote. And I said, that's crazy. There's a fluid secreted called a precoital flow. You can get pregnant from that. The man doesn't have to ejaculate. So with all this in mind, I decided I would fight the law. And I spoke and I showed it. And the moment I decided to give one package of MCO foam, I'm clinical director, telling doctors how to use it. The nonylphenoxy is the spermicide in it, explaining how it works. And if I'm an expert to doctors, I certainly can be an expert to college kids. So some kids came up and took the phone, and all of a sudden I was arrested, and I said, stop, and the cop stopped. And I reached into my pocket, and I took out the sales receipt, and it said $3, Zayre's department store, 9-cent sales tax. And I said to the police, if you arrest me, you arrest the Attorney General for collecting an illegal sales tax on an illegal sale. I was trying to be funny, but I was also trying to be clever to involve the powers that be. And they didn't think I was funny at all. No sense of humor. So to make a long story short, I realized that I hadn't heard a word yet from the ACLU. I said, ACLU, where the heck are you? I'm going to jail. They promised me you'd be here to help. Not a response. And I felt this big double cross. ACLU, where are you? Your reputation's on the line. 3 times. Finally, they jumped up and said, Mr. Baird, we will defend you. And what I'm going to tell you is not part of your history. All of a sudden, I get a call 3 weeks later. Bill Baird, we spoke with Planned Parenthood. They told us your case has no value. We agree your case has no value. We are dropping you. You're going to have to face the 10-year jail term by yourself. Not a lawyer. I'm a stubborn street kid. At that time, 30, I said, no, can't let you get away with it. And so to make a long story short, they put me in jail. I had a horrible, horrible experience, stripped naked by guards, bondage search, abuse beyond your wildest dreams. And when the ACU dropped me, a guy by the name of Joe Bolero, who I never heard of, but he was a hotshot lawyer, normally with the mafia, handles murderers. He says, Baird, I like tough kids. You're tough, he says. I'll take your case on free. I couldn't believe it. Free lawyer? So he took the case and defended me. And this is a twisted story, a painful one. And Joni is somebody who's close friends with him, as I was. Very painful to tell you this story. But I got a call. I'm now headed to the United States Supreme Court. I'm headed to the highest court in the nation, which is my goal. If I could get that law before the court, just maybe I could wipe out all the laws across the country dealing with this. And my other thought was, just maybe if I won, it could knock out the laws on abortion as well as birth control. What a dream. What if a street kid from Brooklyn would maybe be heard by the highest court? So I finally get a call from Senator Gruning. Don't know this guy from a hole in the wall, but a big shot in the population movement. He says, Bill, I want you to do us all a favor. I said, what? Fire Joe Bolero. And this is a painful part. How do you fire the guy who's the only one who had enough guts to defend me? I'm going to fire the guy who gave me a chance of getting out of prison? So I said, no, of course not. He says, look, he said, I'll tell you something. Senator Joe Tidings, it's a big shot in D.C., the population movement. He will take your case free. Well, I said, so I got Joe taking my case. But he says he's friends with the judges. They play golf together. They go different parties together. They know each other. So what makes more sense? You said you wanted to save the lives of women. Would it be better to have a judge who they know already, a lawyer who they know, or somebody like Joe Bolero, who nobody really knew outside of Boston? I said, if it's saving the lives of women, there's no question. The reason I'm putting my life on the line in a prison is to save the lives of women. No more coat hangers, no more knitting needles, no more abuse, no more sexually abused by quacks. No, I said, and I called Joe. I said, Joe, I'm so sorry. And he was angry, and rightfully so. And he said, I'm going to sue you. Joe, you can't win because I'm going to jail if I lose. I have a right to pick who I want, and I want this guy because if he's buddies with him, and this gives me an extra tool in which maybe women will have a greater chance to win their rights. First time in history. At that time, there was no help from Planned Parenthood. At that time, there was no help from the ACLU, no help from the women's movement. They said, we don't want a man in our movement. Get out of our movement. Betty Friedan dare say Bill Baird's a government spy. My wife confronted her at a public meeting and she ran away like a coward. So all these so-called allies I had ran away. So I took this guy, and he was a nice guy, Tidings. We won the case. And I sworn the day that we won the case, I predicted that every abortion law would fall within 1 year based on the right of privacy means anything, the right of the individual to be free, to decide whether to bear or beget a child. That famous quote in my case was the foundation for Roe v. Wade and many other cases later on. So I tell you that to let you know it was a fierce battle. My children were told to be put to death. I have to tell you this. I got arrested. Can you believe this? Got arrested and jailed on a morals charge with a baby. I'm giving a speech in Huntington, Long Island, and a little baby's in the audience. All of a sudden, the mother of the baby is on the floor being handcuffed because she brought a baby, 14 months old, to my speech. And the police jailed the mother, jailed me, saying her baby saw a diaphragm and would get sexual ideas. I mean, you got to be freaking nuts to be that full of hatred to stop me. And so the mother and I both were jailed. Went on trial, of course, the case was thrown out. The judge said the baby doesn't know a diaphragm from a frisbee. Went to jail, finally released, and all of a sudden, in fact, I won $8,000 for false arrest. You know what I did with the $8,000? I held a public meeting, and I had the Suffolk County Police Fund for abortions, and I used their money to pay for abortions to teach them a lesson. They could not abuse me and the mother, but nevertheless, that fight now still goes on. And to this day, when Planned Parenthood put in writing, nothing to be gained by the Baird case, Baird is an embarrassment to us. I had nothing to do with them, but they didn't like me because I took on the Catholic Church. I took on powers. So that's what you have in front of you. A stubborn
Bill,
guy.
can I just interrupt you for
Yeah.
a moment? I think Bill's memory is Joni, I think, can certainly comment on this better than I, but Bill's memory is right on. The idea, of course, that one judge who plays golf with an attorney would actually be influenced by such a thought, we know that couldn't possibly be true. Absolutely not. And we've seen evidence of that, very graphic evidence, in recent years. And also, I think, as Bill suggested, he was really pushed aside and basically ignored and actually attacked by organizations like Planned Parenthood and the ACLU, and for reasons that are, I think, largely unknown in a sense.
Sexism.
But go ahead, Bill.
It was sexism. They said they don't want a man doing their work. I'm saying, they said, well, you have your privilege because you're a man. I said, tell you what, I'm facing 10 years in jail. I'll quit. I'll hold a press conference. I'll quit. You take my jail term. If I get to 10 years, you take my jail term. And I'll sit and I'll sit home and I'll relax. Oh, no, we're not going to jail. Well, then shut your face, since you don't have the guts to do what I'm doing. I was angry with him. I was angry, and I still am, because of the fact, don't tell me what I'm doing that could save the life of one woman, and it's your wife, your daughter, or whoever it may be that means somebody to you. That's wrong. And since I grew up in the sun, my sister died because at the age of 12, we couldn't afford a doctor. God,
Well, I'll jump in a bit just to soften a tiny bit. That Bill's work, kind of diverged with the second wave of feminism. So a lot of it's interesting to study because a lot of the women that were really kind of disempowered, they really were behind Bill, just the everyday person. But the kind of the people that were in power in the women's movement were the ones that resented him and would make comments like, well, men have had the stage for this many centuries. Now it's our turn, which is understandable in a way. So I think there was just this mixed reaction to a man. And Bill takes it very personally, which is understandable. I mean, he was very hurt by.
well, it's the first time, think of this, the first time in history, women were going to be heard by the Supreme Court in Baird v. Osher, my case. What a great chance to give women across the nation to be heard, and their freedom maybe could be won by it be a man, a woman, a polka dot. It doesn't matter. It's somebody figured out a way to be heard by the Supreme Court. And then when Senator Tidings took my case, and we got it before the court, and we won. We won. And you would think people would say, whoa, how great. Now, if you watch TV news, who's on the air? Planned Parenthood saying, Griswold versus Connecticut, Connecticut, legalized birth control. Wait, that's not true. That was for married people only. Only. But people believe that. And now a movie came out that I'd hoped you'd be shown, but a movie has come out, shown all over Europe. It's gotten awards over Europe. The name of it was called Yours in Freedom. Bill Baird. I used to sign all my news releases and letters to the media, Yours in Freedom, because
as I understand it, Bill, that film has not yet been released in the States. Is that correct?
We're having a lot of trouble.
It's at a film festival, UN Film Festival out of Stanford. It's making the film festival rounds.
My wife is and she won't be happy with my saying this, is a published writer. She wrote the book on my life, carefully documented it. We brought it to half a dozen places in the United States. Nobody more.
Try about 70.
And not one publisher will touch it in the United States.
Time to self-publish.
They're afraid of maybe they might be sued by Planned Parenthood. Everything is documented. Everything is from news releases or their releases. And yet I can't get it published. Why? Why are we hiding the truth?
So if we can move away from that for a sec, I think there's another interesting kind of byplay here that Bill can talk about, because Bill was way ahead of his time, because even when the cases Eisenstadt and Roe came down, Bill warned that this was not the end of the story.
The day of the Supreme Court ruling, I had said, fight not over. Planned Parenthood said to New York Times, Dr. Guttmacher, the head, we put our feet on the desk, the fight was over. I said, you're wrong. You're wrong. Joni and I were the only two people in the United States for decades did of all crazy things. We went to the Right to Life Convention. We actually sat with 2,000 of them, and there was just two of us. And they hated us, and they threw us out. I called the police. The police escorted us in because it was open to the public. But we were the only ones from our movement who would face them and take them really head on. And after a while, I used to sing in a church choir. And when they sang this, they're all mostly Catholics and evangelicals. When they started to sing their Christian songs, I sang. And I had a fairly good voice. So they heard me singing their songs. They couldn't believe this heathen, this evil man knows our songs. And some started to like me. A fellow by the name of Father Pavone, priest for life, he headed that. He took a liking to us. And believe this or not, you're hearing this for the first time, Joni, alongside me, brilliant as she is, wrote the first and only peace contract between a Catholic organization and the pro-choice league that there would be no violence, no hate speech between our two sides. And that was powerful. Then right after that, what happened? The Bishop of Cleveland called me. He set up a meeting. He wanted to talk with me. And I said to him, I'm worried about your place. I said, my clinic was firebombed with 60 people in it. People are being shot. 12 people were shot to death from our side. I said, do you think you can't get shot? You think you can't get killed? Are you threatening me? I said, no. I said, but I'm trying to say, can we not tone down the hatred? Don't call us the devil. Don't call us evil. Don't call us murderers. So this is what he said. It went nationwide. We call on all involved after meeting Bill Baird and the pro-choice life movement to avoid inflammatory rhetoric and be respectful of the opposition. They actually reached out an olive branch. I gave that to Now, gave that to Planned Parenthood. That's a historic document. Not one on our side would use it because Joni and I brought the document to them. I mean, when you have a side, if you don't have the guts to do some of these things, and for Christ's sake, then at least let the people who have the guts and are successful, they brought the case and they won the case. And you know what happened? And I'm telling you this because it's got to be told, because I'm infuriated. When you win a case before the Supreme Court, the court gives you back your money. I spent tens of thousands of dollars. Planned Parenthood, when they saw I was headed to the Supreme Court, they filed a brief. And they were awarded, after we won, for their brief amount, they were given 150 grand. Hear that? 150 grand. I spent way more than that. And what do you think I was given? 100 grand? 20 grand? 10 grand? $10? Not a penny. Not a penny. They wanted to punish me. They said, well, Baird, you were late in filing your brief with Roy Lucas. That was a lie. That was a lie. But nevertheless, I grieve inside that we don't understand we're in this together. You may not like my approaches, but you show me something better. I did it. You didn't. Fact.
So, Bill, in light of the Dobbs decision and in light of what we're hearing about the possibility of this possible domino effect, based on your experience, what do you think of the future of IVF or abortion medication or this? Go ahead.
If we don't wake up and realize, as I've said 50 years ago, this is a holy war. This is based in religion, seeking to impose their God, a version of God, on everyone else. If Jehovah's Witnesses said to you, hey, gang, you need a blood transfusion? Well, it's against our religion. You cannot have it. How about this? I don't know what you had for breakfast this morning, but suppose you had ham and eggs, and there's a knock on the door, and the Orthodox Jewish police are there. You're under arrest. Why? You ate pork. Pork is against our religion. Why? But I'm not Jewish. I'm not any of these religions. And lo and behold, we have still to this day the power of evangelicals with Catholics who say a fertilized egg is a person. You can be nuts to say a fertilized egg is a person, okay? But if you want to believe it, I have no fight with that. But don't make me believe it. Don't put me in jail for that. And all I ask you on my side, recognize it's a holy war. Say to the churches, boycott the business holdings. Christian Brothers Wine, owned by the church. Monk's Bread, owned by the church. Boycott it. What's it? Trappers Jams, Friends from Massachusetts, owned by the church. Recognize the power your foe has and strengthen back, but you're afraid to do that. But you're not afraid to let your wife die or your daughter die, as several people have already been dead. I don't get that. All I am is a now, believe it or not, 92-year-old guy who still thinks, maybe somebody will hear me. Maybe somebody will say, Bill Baird, you know what? if you could do it for 60, 70 years, Jesus Christ, I can do it. I can do it. I can help. Hey, you lost 100 grand. Maybe you could give me back some of that money. No, Joni says not to say that. Baloney. I have laid out tens of thousands of dollars. Why should one guy go to jail, come up the battle plan, then have to pay for everything? Everyone sits back and say, oh, Planned Parenthood did a great job, and give them the money, millions of dollars. And they say, Bill Bear, who's he? Don't even know him. I don't get this. Maybe, you think I'm nuts?
Well, Bill, I think this story is really an incredible and basically untold story. Pieces have come out over the years. Bill has been a personality and a figure in this movement 6 decades, and has really, when you hear history from the people who made it, that's really a pretty rare event. And I want to thank Bill and his wife, Joni, for their remarkable efforts over the years, for their really monumental achievements for human rights, despite being marginalized by many who frankly should have supported them and lauded their many contributions publicly, but for various reasons did not. Bill wasn't interested in power or money, personal gain. What he was trying to do was to provide a safe way for women to beget or not to beget without interference from others. And I think that Tim Walz has said it best. Why don't you mind your own goddamn business?
Bingo.
And I think that, Bill, you probably could have said that a million times. And I don't know whether it would ever have made a difference. But certainly Walz has brought that back to our attention. And it's my own feeling, for whatever that may be worth, that in the next 4 weeks, this issue will be the defining issue of the election. Yes, the
You're right.
economy, yes, immigration, but I think it's going to come down to a very few places in a very few states. And it's going to depend on whether mostly women and young people come out and stand up for this critical right of privacy. This attitude of the far right, that they can be in our bedrooms, our bathrooms, our locker rooms, our libraries, is just, I think, not only inappropriate, but I believe in the end, unconstitutional. And Bill was and is a stand-up guy who did remarkable work. And I'd like to thank him now for everything he's done for all of that time.
Well, it means a lot. I thank you.
So, Bill, you're welcome to stay on if you want or not, but we're going to move on. What time is it, Joni? Here?
10:43.
I think we'll take a break here. Did we get any questions? Okay, why don't you
Without the support of each other, without the support of your spouse, doing so as a couple is challenging. Thank you. Doing so as a couple is challenging. Is it possible to do so absolutely alone?
So that question, Bill, did you hear it?
I couldn't hear the whole question. I'm sorry.
Well, basically it was, could you have possibly done this without the help of your your partner, Joni? And is this something that anybody could possibly do alone?
All I can
No,
share,
he did do it alone. I was not involved with his work, his Supreme Court cases, so.
but also Joni has been incredible strength to me for all these years. I mean, I was supposed to die from cancer. She got me to a hospital when I didn't want to go. All sorts of things she's done to save my life, to make me the curmudgeon that I am today. But I do want to say one very quick thing. I forgot one of the things that made me very unpopular was when the Pope came to the United States, they were going to build an altar for him. And the altar was like thousands of dollars. I said, the church is $1 million business. Why not take that money, give it to poor women who need money? And I said, Planned Parenthood said it was wrong. The others said it was wrong, but no one would do anything. So I said, if you do, I'll sue. And I did. The case was called Baird versus White. And the only lawyer in the United States who had enough guts, enough courage to not only take my case and to win so that they had to pay for their own mass services was sitting by you right now, Joan Green. I will love her to the day I die because she showed such courage, such
So
vision.
that case was brought in Boston.
Yes,
White was the mayor. for
right.
4 terms.
And it
then.
was Joan Green who took the case. Nobody else would do it, but she did it, and she won.
Yeah. Joni, you want to say a few words about that? Come on. You were there.
Yeah, the city was gonna pay for an altar in the Boston Common. And have a religious ceremony in the Boston Common paid for by the city. So many of us thought that was wrong, and Bill spearheaded that, and we went into court. And immediately, you know, after the first hearing, the city just backed down because they knew they were wrong. It was a clear First Amendment violation. And that was an easy victory. It was like
An easy victory.
nobody
Yeah.
got to jail.
An easy victory over the Pope. So only one of many, many stories over the years. Bill, again, thank you, and Joni both, again. And I hope this, are there any other questions, Sarah?
One more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this, no, this is on. Okay. Bill, are you able to hear my question?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. So we have an online question from an anonymous submission. In 1971, I transported a 16-year-old woman to Logan Airport in Boston to go to New York so she could get an abortion. And afterwards, I picked her up and drove her home. It just occurred to me now, I didn't know then and I don't know now, but under Massachusetts state law or federal law, could I have been arrested and charged for doing so back then or not?
You very much could have been, and a lot of people were charged with different crimes. But the thing about me was that when I did it, I started it in the 60s. It was clearly against the law. There was a magazine, I'll show it to you, because I'm a great believer, document what you say. This is a magazine called Sepia, a black publication. You can't see the date, but Johnny will tell you the date. 1967, July. And on the cover it says, dial this phone, my phone number for my clinic for an abortion. Here, this is 67. It wasn't made legal until 72, so 73. So my point was, here I had this publication that proved I was helping people for decades. Planned Parenthood, all the others, well, he does illegal abortions. He does. Yeah, I was doing extra legal abortions. But I forgot to tell you, and this is very important because it hurt me more than ever. Remember I told you I was arrested on a morals charge because a baby was in the audience? They arrested the mother. Of course, I won the case. But you know what happened when I won? My children, the little Dawn, Scott Baird, they were all 3, 4, and 5, got calls they would be put to death. My first wife said, I'm out of here. I'm not going to kill my kids for your movement. And they took my children, moved them hundreds of miles away in hiding. I haven't talked to them now for many years. Much pain to tell you this story, because obviously I didn't have a strong enough bond to hold them, and I grieve. But the bottom line is I am so eternally grateful Joni's in my life because she saved my life many times. Without her, I I really couldn't be able to do what I do. And I will always love her and worship her for the great person she was and Joni Green. With all those good people in my life, I'd be nothing. So I'm grateful to those good people. Thank you.
Any questions here? Ross?
Think, and do others think that this is Kamala's strongest issue in this campaign or not?
Do you want to comment on whether you think, Bill, this is,
Could you tell me a question like
It's abortion and birth control. is
whether
straight.
Kamala's, whether abortion is her
Oh,
big
this is the whole issue, right? The abortion birth control issue will make or sink this movement. And I beg people, please, when you go to vote, don't go vote by yourself. Take your neighbors. Some people don't have cars. Some people forget the date or they're older. Try to get as many people, because I know most people believe that if you ask them, should I ask my neighbor if I can have an abortion, or should I ask my politician? They don't want to know that. This is my personal decision, what they always tell me, always tell me. When women tell me they would rather die than go through a pregnancy, and I say, sweetheart, if you're willing to face death, I'm willing to face jail to help you. And I would. And that's the way I led my life.
Yeah, you voted yesterday.
Duncan?
I voted yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering if the campaign would be better off pushing the birth control side of this than the abortion side, because there are many people in the country, I think, may personally be opposed to abortion, but rely on birth control.
I think that's an interesting point.
Would you
And
clarify?
what he said was that, in fact, if perhaps the issue was targeted toward contraception or birth control, as opposed to abortion, that it might get greater support in the community. I think,
I fought very hard initially for decades for the birth control issue. In fact, this will shock you. I have in front of me dozens of articles to document what I'm saying, but I have in front of me a news release put out by Planned Parenthood when I was arrested in 1967 at Boston University. You got to know how scary that is to have a dozen cops up on a stage, handcuff you, say you're under arrest for violation of law, crimes against chastity, for exhibiting and giving out information about birth control and abortion. Birth control. I gave out the phone, and that carried with it upwards of 10 years in prison. Now, what more could I have done than focusing and giving out the phone to these people? And of course, when I did that, I knew that I had a great chance of dying in prison or being killed in prison. I was well aware of that. Charles Street Jail, as Joan Green will tell you, she hated going in that prison to see prisoners. The smell was horrible. The violence in there, people were raped at night, beaten. I saw that. I heard that. And I grieved for what men were going through. And yet, nevertheless, I knew they were trying to break me. I mean, they strip you naked, put their fingers inside you to do what they do to you, to break you so you would give up. And I would not. I'd always have that vision of that woman who died with a coat hanger in her. I said, no, I will die first before I give up to try the chance to save them. If somebody could have saved my 12-year-old sister, the same thing. They were all part of the same family. If I can give you a message that we love each other, care about you, we're people of the same family. I'm no great shot. I'm just the most stubborn guy you'll meet who will never give in to these bullies, ever.
Well, I think the abortion issue trumps.
go ahead, Joni.
I think the abortion issue in the election is more visually powerful for people. And also the fact that these very, very brave women have gotten up, and talked about how they nearly died from sepsis. I think that kind of sears people's brains more than the birth control issue. I think that they don't believe it, oh, we'll always get birth control. I hear that all the time. So I think they're doing the right thing, focusing on the abortion issue.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a 15-minute
Ask
break.
questions. If
We'll
people
come
want
back
questions, they can
and
email.
we'll move forward.
Okay.
Joni, You had more, did I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Oh, if anybody wants to ask questions, they can email us. I don't know if you guys have our email or,
No, do you want to give it out?
sure, it's J and then Bill's last name Baird, 444 at Gmail. It's jbaird 444 at Gmail.
Okay. Thank you all. Take 15. in the past, many of you will remember that we've had luncheons at the end of the session. We've done that particularly at the Coolidge Hotel in White River. So as you know, or may know, the next to last class of this course is the day after the election. And I thought that if you were interested, we could do something here. And I've taken a quick look at the menu, and they have a couple of box lunch kinds of options. The total cost all in, I think, would be somewhere between $20 and $25. That's before the adult beverage. And so if you're, how many of you might be interested? This would not be the last class, it would be the next to last class. So we will take we need to get a group together. Basically, we pick them up at the end and just come back to the tables and, have good cheer or maybe not so good cheer. I don't know, depending upon the results. But in any event, something perhaps to think about. Yes.
The last class in 2016 because I couldn't get out of bed. So I'm hoping that on that day I can get out of bed.
Well, I can remember that day quite vividly. We were in the building on the campus downstairs in that room. That's the only time we were able to get the room. And I remember there was a guy in the back who had started with us and left, and then he was there that day, and he came in at the back of the room, and I waved to him, and he waved back, and he said, "I just came to take a victory lap." And so, that was 2016. This is 2024. Some would say there have been a lot of changes. Some might say maybe not enough or maybe too many. But I know that as I stand here today, I am concerned about Pennsylvania, about Michigan, about Wisconsin. And we have 3 weeks to go before the election, 3 class weeks, and then 2 afterwards. Because somewhere deep in my heart, I knew that November 5th was not the end. And we certainly don't know what's going to happen on the 5th or in the days following. When will Pennsylvania report? It could be a week. When will North Carolina report?
Yeah.
Will Georgia ever report? I think these are serious questions. So in any case, we'll see as we go along. But the next 5 Wednesdays are, you should definitely mark on your schedule. It's interesting when you go back in the history of the abortion contraception movement to Planned Parenthood and the history of those who are Planned Parenthood that went through a whole series of name changes. And Margaret Sanger, of course, was one of the early founders. And the Comstock Act, which was passed in 1873 and is still on the books in Congress. And a lot of the people on the right have said, we don't need any additional legislation because we have the Comstock Act. And the Comstock Act among other things, forbid the sale or the transmission of any material that dealt with a whole series of things, including abortion and contraception and the transmission of pornography and a whole series of other things through the mails. Through the mails was a very important piece. Well, now we have a post office system. That guy Louis is still there. I don't know why he hasn't been kicked out in the Biden administration. But more important than that, we now have UPS, FedEx, and a whole series of other ways to transmit this stuff. So I think the Comstock Act is something that we are going to hear a lot more about, despite its age. In 1947, you all remember that year, Prescott Bush, who was George Herbert Walker Bush's father, was the senator. Actually, he was the senator, I think, from 53 to 62. But back at that time, he was the treasurer of Planned Parenthood. And it's interesting to note that George Herbert Walker Bush, who became president, used to call his father Rubbers. That was his nickname for his father. Now he was the essence of conservatism in those days. Bush family was a very prominent, obviously, family, and also Goldwater was a backer of Planned Parenthood. At one time, Eisenhower and Truman served as co-chairs of Planned Parenthood. So we've come a long way here. Republican women were basically the champions of Planned Parenthood in their early days. They gave most of the money, they ran the events, they supported this cause, and somewhere along the line, somehow everybody switched sides. Of course, a lot of things happened in the South, where all those Democrats became Republicans, and all those Republicans became Democrats, or at least many of them. But my point is that this was, in the early stages, this was not a right v. left issue. It has become that more and more and more because of the court. It has become that because of religious groups, particularly the Catholic Church and evangelicals, but not solely. But clearly, they have been very much involved in all of this. And if you trace the history of the Republican Party, basically from Reagan right through where we are today, you can see the growth of the right-wing fringe movement. Mike Pence really was the leader in the Trump administration for the birth control issue. He appointed a number of key people in the Trump administration in HHS and in a number of other agencies who were responsible for rules and regulations that went way beyond what any Republican president had ever tried to do. And so while we, some people may think of Pence as a potential savior or whatever because of his activities on January 6th, one should note that he was not free of blame for much of this effort. I think also it's important to note, because I think it's apparent in the history, Roe v. Wade didn't occur on June 24th, 2022. That was the day the decision was issued, but it didn't all happen on that day. It took place over at least 20, probably double that amount of time. From the Reagan administration all the way down, we saw the birth of the Tea Party. We saw the Reagan administration and a young lawyer named John Roberts, who was a lawyer in the White House. We saw the birth of the Federalist Society, 1982, and the move toward literally taking over the judiciary in this country, the federal judiciary, which the Federalist Society has succeeded in doing. We saw the birth of lobbyists. We saw originalism, textualism, all this stuff. That's a 5-letter word, not a 4-letter word. That was and is still being perpetrated on the American public and in the American judicial scene by a majority of people in the Supreme Court and throughout the federal judiciary. Frankly, during the Obama tenure, they didn't have their eyes on the lower level elections. And during the Obama 8 years, the Republicans gained like 1,400 legislative seats in this country, in the state legislatures. And that has still caused serious issues in terms of the direction of this country. And the Republicans still control more state legislatures than the Democrats. And if this election does wind up in the House of Representatives, no matter how many Democrats are in the House, the Republicans hold more states and they will win that contingent election. There's no doubt about that. And of course, we also remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who apparently in a meeting with Obama at the White House, before he stepped down, she basically told him to go to hell. She wasn't leaving and she wasn't going anywhere. We have lived with that and will live with that for a very long time. So perhaps most importantly of all, the country just didn't believe that something as important as Roe, in terms of our history, over 50 years, that right could be taken away. You know, the Democrats control Congress for a significant portion of that time. Nobody ever introduced a law to make that ruling or to take that ruling and turn it into a federal law. Everybody was very complacent or believed that this was a train that couldn't be stopped. But in fact, it was not only completely overturned, but, as I say, I think has put many of these other laws has put them in danger, including Baird, Eisenstadt v. Baird, but including a lot of other laws, including these LGBTQ laws, and including laws for homosexual marriage, and a whole series of other things. We're going to see all of that, more of it. And that's going to happen no matter who wins this election. Because the right wing is focused on that, and they are not going to give this up. And I think also the other groups who support this, you know, you go back to the 20s and 30s to the concept of eugenics, which was basically the beginning or part of the beginning of the Nazi movement. We had 60 or 70,000 people in this country who were sterilized because, quote unquote, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Words by one of the most famous Supreme Court justices. And what is coming back at us now, what the vice presidential candidate for Trump is talking about is basically eugenics, that some people are naturally superior to others, and that we ought to promote that, and not only promote it, but we got to get rid of the other people. And I think this is something that, as I say, we're going to continue to see. And if you go back to when we were growing up, most of us, in the 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it's interesting to me when we look back at that time when we were dating. Remember dating? I don't know. And you know, many of us, when we were dating, it was illegal until 1972 to get birth control. And I think people who are considerably younger than us, and maybe much younger than us, our grandkids, et cetera, maybe great-grandkids, they certainly don't understand what it means. How could that ever have been possible? Well, it was possible. In fact, that was the law of the land. Even Griswold, which was decided in 65, was limited to married people. And Bill's case didn't come along until 1972. But if you also think about those times after the war, when all the soldiers came back from overseas, and what happened in this country. I mean, many wonderful things, some things perhaps not so good, but what happened was a general, I would suggest, loosening or changing of morality. We had things like the Kinsey Report, 1948. That was described, I think, in Time magazine as the second atom bomb. Wow. I mean, and then a few years later, there was another Kinsey Report on women. And, it turned out that people were doing things that nobody had particularly paid attention to and doing them more often. And then a guy named Hugh Hefner came along and started Playboy magazine. How many of you ever went to a Playboy club? I mean, yeah. Gee, Ross, you and I are alone here. But, I mean, the world just changed. We had a motion picture code. Some guy named Hayes, who was, I think, a former postmaster general. And you couldn't use, certain words, couldn't use any words in a movie. I think the first movie, The Moon is Blue, and forget the name of the gal, but the word that was used that kicked the film out of the theaters was virgin. Oh my God, virgin! You can't watch a movie today on television, on cable, without a series of words that I'll bet you didn't use that often back in the 40s and 50s. I always used them, but most people. And I think that, so we began to see that kind of thing. I can remember in the 60s, topless shoe shines in San Francisco. I didn't make that up. I can remember Lenny Bruce and all of that line of comedians. One of the reasons that Bob Hope and others of that ilk were so popular was that they were funny without being dirty, I guess is the word. So, they didn't use the four-letter words that now George Carlin used, and everybody was, oh my God. And now, when you're 4 years old, you're talking that way. I mean, one of our most important generational shifts in music, rap music. Maybe somebody can explain it to me someday. But I'm an old Sinatra guy, so that was very different. But the music of the rap world today is basically 3 or 4 words repeated in different combinations ad infinitum. And, these guys and gals make a barrel of money. They're on all kinds of shows, in the Super Bowl, everywhere they can be. And that is true today all over the world. So I have to say that I find that a little difficult to kind of comprehend and believe, but I can still turn on Fly Me to the Moon and feel, as though, well, I can listen to this even if nobody else wants to hear it. So I think that I think that's important. So we have this change that has come over the whole world. We have today, I'm sure many of you remember, you probably have this on the table next to your bed, an edition of Ulysses by James Joyce, a book that I have to tell you I've tried to read several times, and obviously I just don't get it. But that was the book that actually changed almost everything for pornography in this country, because the judge who heard that case, and then when it was appealed, said basically the individual words or thoughts or whatever that are stated here are not what you're supposed to look at. You're supposed to look at the book as a whole. And that this was, frankly, I think because he probably didn't understand it either. But Joyce was a very important author from another country. And therefore, this should be something that we should recognize. You'll also remember, I'm sure, although I know that none of you ever did this, but there were movies in those days that began to get around. And most of those movies were, the court actually said they were pornographic. And one of the famous lines by Potter Stewart, I think at the time, was, "I can't define it, but I know it when I see it." And it turns out the court did a lot of looking, because every Thursday they would gather in the judge's room and watch these movies, dozens of them, except for Douglas and Black, who didn't believe that any movie was obscene, so there was no reason for them to watch it. And one of the justices, I actually don't remember which one, but one of them was growing blind, so he couldn't really see the screen. So one of his clerks was there to describe to everybody what was going on in that room. I'm not making this up. So that's when it really paid to be a justice. So, and then finally the court said, we can't define it, so basically let it go. Who cares? There was a very famous case of a guy who owned an outdoor theater. Some of you probably went to a drive-in theater. And you may even remember somebody you were with at that time. And anyway, what happened was, the way the screen was set, people who were walking or driving by could see the screen. And there were a fair number of accidents that happened on the road, not to mention the people who were lined up on the sidewalk watching this thing. And there was a case brought against the owner and operator of that movie operation. And the court did rule that they were not guilty of spreading pornography. It was just kind of one of those things. So I think Bill actually referred to this in his comment, but I want to kind of reiterate that this concept of privacy, while not in the Constitution per se, was something that came out of the amendments to the Constitution and really have been supported with discussion by many of the justices over the years. So the idea that in your home you should be able to do whatever it is that you want to do, so long as that doesn't interfere with anybody else. I think that's kind of an underlying concept that is important to remember. So any questions here on Baird or on abortion? The concept that someone, I guess it was Duncan, suggested maybe, going at this from the standpoint of contraception. I think that's an interesting thought. we've got 3.5 weeks to go here, less. That's no time at all. This is going to be over the next time you wake up, practically. And I think it's late to start changing the message. I wish the message had been a little different. I wish they had been a little more aggressive. I wish they had asked more questions rather than trying to answer all these questions. But we are where we are. And I do think it's going to come down to Pennsylvania and probably Michigan and Wisconsin. We said at the beginning that there was a southern route here possible going from North Carolina to Georgia, out to Arizona. I don't think that's realistic today. I may be wrong, but the way, and of course the polls are all over the place. So it's very difficult to evaluate. But I think that in the end, the best route that the Democrats have is the northern route. And of course, Pennsylvania is the key to that. I think as we stand here today, whoever wins Pennsylvania probably wins the election. But have stranger things happened? Maybe, but not many. And if you look at Nate Silver, or you look at 270, or you look at 538, or those kinds of aggregators, I think they're about as flummoxed as we are, because these polls are just almost impossible to read. And the margins of error, which are typically 3.5%, mostly in that area. But these polls are all 1% or less, most of them. And, nobody can, and I don't know whether you noticed, I think we talked the first week about betting on elections. And in the interim, the Federal Appeals Court has ruled that betting on elections is legal now in the United States. And so if you go on there are dozens of websites, but Poly, one that begins with Poly, I don't have it right in front of me, but that's the biggest one. That one had, when we met several weeks ago, they already had $1 billion that had been waged on the presidential race. $1 billion. I'm sure that number is now much greater. They also don't have, I think the limit, I think this is right. Doesn't sound right. I was going to say the limit is 85 million, but anyway, it's a very large number that you can bet. Most of the other sites have much smaller contracts. In other words, you can buy a contract for $5 or $10, something like that. But the big guys are essentially, the big money is there. And the last I looked, it was 50.1 to 49.9. Well, you can't get any closer than that in terms of odds. So it's close. And yeah, Carol.
Peter Ginsburg had retired. Would Obama's next appointment have been approved?
Well, I think that's a fair question. And, I think that's a fair question. We don't know. But I think that, we stood a better chance then than we do now. That's all I would say. Well, right. Look what happened to Merrick Island. I would say, I wonder whether Merrick Island was the right choice. Yeah.
Going back to the betting on the election, I happened to be in Times Square yesterday and the day before, and I don't know how many people have been to Times Square. I'll tell you, you're blinded by all the digital advertising down there. And one of the huge advertisements was this betting company. It starts with K, something like
Kalshi. Yeah.
And they had numbers up there. Trump 51% and Harris 49%. I mean,
So it's in your face. Right. So imagine, or just think about what kind of an impact that can have. One small impact, big sign. And how many people are going through Times Square every day? It's a lot. And, who knows what kind of an effect that can have on people who are going to vote or not going to vote, as the case may be. But I think that's a very interesting point. Yes.
I see something that looks suspicious on my phone. I don't answer it. Yeah, I'm old. My kids answer less. So I will poll, and certainly polls that come in the mail, they're good for lining your waistband.
Well, I think the polls are supposed to be reporting what they're finding. The betting is that's kind of the other side of a different coin. The polls and the betting are not necessarily related. Somebody who's ahead in the polls may or may not be a favorite in the betting. But as I think I mentioned when we first talked about it, I'm very concerned about what the prospects for betting could be, not only because of what the stakes are in the election, but because if you spread that out and say, well, I can not only bet on the presidency, but I can bet on the selectman's race in New London or Hanover, or I can bet on what the Supreme Court is going to decide on Tuesday in this case. And I haven't seen anybody suggest that, but I don't know why that would be off base. So I think that's where the influence of money becomes so important. And I would suggest to you that if you look back at the history of campaign financing, I think we all remember McCain-Feingold, which was the last real law that we had before the court obliterated it with Citizens United. But basically today, there is no limit. I mean, we saw that. Anybody see Elon Musk on the stage with was that unbelievable? This is the richest man in the world? What? Can you see John D. Rockefeller up there? I mean, I'm not suggesting to you that John D. Rockefeller was, someone we should be proud of, but you certainly wouldn't have seen him in that kind of an outfit and in that kind of a situation doing that. And so I think that we have a situation where, and Elon Musk is in a position to write a check for any amount of money that Trump needs or says he needs at any time. I mean, any amount of money. So money is not what's going to decide this race. Harris has raised a huge amount of money in a very short time. It's probably an all-time record given the time and the amount of money. But it isn't the money that's going to decide. It's whatever is going to, and how many independent or other voters do we have who haven't made up their mind? How is it in this country we can have thousands of people who can't decide whether to vote for Donald Trump or not? It doesn't seem plausible. Maybe it is, but he certainly has been around long enough and been the subject of enough discussion and everything else that it seems to me you either love him or you hate him. Yes.
How are people gonna prove they have a residence? Whoops, they don't have.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I didn't really, I saw this morning that this hurricane was not as bad as they expected. But what happened in Asheville and what we may see happening as a result of this, may be that we have really serious problems. I think the hurricanes could play a role in North Carolina or in Georgia, because people whose houses are gone or who may have already voted and the post offices have disappeared and the ballots, how do you know who's voted, who hasn't? How can you prove it? And you can be sure that will be the subject of more than one lawsuit in the follow-up to the election in November. Well, I think I'm going to take the liberty of the current chair of this meeting, and I'm going to say, are there any other questions? Oh, yes, I didn't see you out back there. Okay. Yes, Sugar.
Someone said that because Trump won't have been president, his effect of losing the election won't be quite as influential as it was in the past. Is that true?
So someone said Trump wouldn't be.
Before he was president, he had more influence. And they say this time he won't, because he won't be president.
This time he wasn't president, so he wouldn't have more influence? Oh, last time. I don't see that as being, I don't believe that. I mean, when you look at his coming down the escalator and everything that has followed, I think you have to say one thing. He has turned the whole political world upside down. And it's nothing like it was before. And I don't think anybody really knows where it's going. But he is omnipresent everywhere. And I'm a very old guy. And I'm afraid that one of the last, I don't want the image of Donald Trump to be the last thing I see. So I'm hopeful that will be the case. Carol.
Service.
Louis DeJoy, that's his name.
There is a committee that runs it, it's not run by Congress. And
There's a board. Well, I think the question of whether he could be kicked out or not is an interesting question. But okay. Well, thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed Bill. And next week we'll get back to the numbers, and we'll only be a couple of weeks away from Armageddon.